Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft Early Access coverage. This is episode 39. I'm Enigmas, and today we're building the Entropic Slug. I love that name. It's just so much fun. If you missed the video, there's a short video on a new playlist for Robocraft called Robocraft Burst Fire. It's actually one of the first matches in this bot. We got put into a boss battle. This is a tier 5 bot, and we were up against a tier 10 SMG cruiser with a tier 8 medic hover pocket healer, which I think is kind of silly, but that's what we were up against. And surprisingly, this bot held up pretty well to sustain fire from a tier 10 SMG cruiser. So the whole premise of this bot, it's tier 5. I just felt like building a bot without having to worry about cost so much, because when you get to tier 10 and you start working on bots where the chassis blocks are, 6 to 12,000 RP each, cost is a limiting factor. I just felt like doing something from start to finish without having to take 2 weeks to do it. So this was born. I haven't used the caterpillar tracks before, so you can see I'm kind of mucking about, seeing how we can get them all to fit together and work and all that other stuff. The whole idea of the caterpillar tracks is that they're very resilient. They've got a lot of hit points or a lot of armor, depending on how you want to describe that, but the bottom line is they take a certain amount of damage before they're destroyed. They've also got a number of connection points on each pod, as they're called. Apparently, that's what I see people calling them, so that you can connect a number of different things to them, or you can connect your chassis to them in a number of different places and not have to worry about that one connection being the end of you if it happens to get damaged. So there's that was kind of a consideration for this whole thing, is it's supposed to be beefy. The other thing is that they're not very fast. They're slower than wheels, basically, is the best way to describe it. They're not painfully slow, which is nice. I was very relieved that that was the case, but they are slower than wheels. So I've mentioned previously with other builds and other strategies, the whole idea of having a bot that you know is slow from the beginning, so that kind of determines exactly what it is that you're trying to get out of the situation. In the case of a really slow bot that's fairly robust, SMG seemed like the reasonable choice, because with plasma and rails, a big part of the strategy is getting into and out of cover. Even with the plasma and a relatively short reload compared to rails, when you're not able to fire, there's no point sitting out in the open eating shots to the face. So the ability to retract into cover, kind of important. So having a big, bulky, slow, resilient bot with plasma on it seemed a little bit counterproductive. Even if it's big and bulky, that doesn't mean I want to be sitting out in the open eating shots that I don't have to. So really the only option was SMGs. Even though I think of SMG as frontline fighters, the way people move in matches, you can, as long as you start moving at the beginning of the match, you'll be halfway across the map before the other guys even figured out the match has started. Trust me. So not too worried about that. But I did, you see, I've got a little bit done in terms of the chassis holding the pods together. There's 3, obviously, with the driver's seat just kind of plunked on one of them. This was the opportunity for me to test a few things. First of all, the handling characteristics, because I'd never driven a bot like this, and it made a lot of sense to just get in and see how it goes. One of the things that I noticed is that they turn much faster when you're not moving forward. So if you need to turn quickly, get off the throttle, turn, and then start moving forward again, you'll get much tighter turn radius, which was kind of a good find. The other thing is you'll notice that the chassis blocks on the back end are basically scraping the ground, and I wanted to make sure before I built this bot all the way around with chassis blocks right on the ground that these things weren't going to be dragging and giving us problems in terms of maneuverability, because sometimes I noticed previously with a rail cruiser that I had that there were times that even just having like a radar jammer underneath would be enough for it to hang up on the ground, and then wheels would start lifting and the maneuverability would go all wonky at times. But you can see we're kind of going through the paces here in the practice map, doing what we can to figure out exactly what's going on. Here's another benefit of the tracks, is they have a fantastic vertical climb. And then, do we need a flipper for this bot? Yep, we sure do, because the way I drive, we're probably going to encounter that situation sooner or later. So, very, very simple so far. I mean, it's all just the armor core squiggles up to this point. The one thing that you'll notice is that as it's built currently, right now, we're looking at it, is that they're all the really vulnerable kind, where if you take a shot in the middle, you can cut off a huge section of the bot. That's not going to be the finished kind of way that this thing is going to be handled. We don't want that situation where we're losing massive chunks of our bot because we took a hit in just the right spot. We want to make sure that things are connected well so that we can soak all the damage that we can direct the damage around the various different things as best we can, and we don't have that old sort of iteration Triforce weakness of losing massive chunks of things just because of the way we limited the number of connections. We can do a lot of connections with the armor core idea without sacrificing how robust the bot is and how able it is to absorb damage, but we just have to be a little bit patient with it and kind of set it up and have that in the back of our mind that it's not about sending the damage on really, really long paths, because when you start insisting on those really, really long paths, that's when you get the chunks falling off your bot, because you don't have enough connections between the paths to prevent that from happening when you get a shot on one end and a shot on the other, and everything in between just disappears. So what we want to do is we want to think in terms of the squiggly lines, because that's where we're routing the damage, and then we want to build a bridge from one squiggly line to the next. So basically, it's very, very similar to cubes, except it's going to force, instead of being able to go from one block directly over to the next block, it's going to have to go from one block to another, and then to that block. So it's a very small distinction, this whole idea of the squiggles and the bridges versus the cubes, but the benefit can sometimes be up to 4 times more more practical armor value than if we had just built out of solid cubes. That's what it's all about. It's not about these super long paths that are just going to absorb all kinds of damage and we won't even notice that we were just hit. It's just about being practical and saying 2 or 3 times more blocks that the shot has to go through, the damage has to go through before it hits something important is huge. It's a massive ratio that kind of makes the difference between an all cube build and an armor core build. So here in this case, you can see we've now surrounded the caterpillar tracks. This is something that I've noticed with most of the track builds that I see out there, is that particularly in the higher tiers, which is where I spend most of my time, people tend to not build all the way around them. And I can understand why. It's a lot of blocks, and if you don't you don't have a ton of RP, it's a bit tough to do. There's a big area that you have to cover if you want to start covering these things. But at the same time, that means you've got sort of this one really big single block is basically what it works out to, that is exposed to damage. And if you're taking some erosive damage like plasma on the top of the bot, and then you start losing the pods underneath from, whatever kind of damage it takes to knock them out, it tends to be pretty problematic. What I've noticed with a lot of the caterpillar bots is that they soak a lot of damage at the beginning, but then there's a point where they just kind of seem to break. And then everything that they were doing, they were beefy, they were irritating, they were obnoxious because they weren't dying, and all of a sudden they're just a little driver's seat. That's all it is. So we want to avoid that by making sure that we're protecting the pods as much as we would protect anything else. So you can see really long strings of squiggly lines. Still working on those, and it's taking a little while, but this total build from start to finish, 45 minutes. I mean, if someone can't spare 45 minutes to build a bot, what? For me, 45 minutes to build a bot is not a big deal. I sometimes see people commenting that, they build such and such a bot and they're mad about the balance and they don't have time like all these other people who have hours and hours and hours to plan out these builds and do all these bots. And I'm like, I don't ever spend hours and hours and hours on a single bot. If it takes a long time to build, it's because it's big. And if it takes a long time to kind of figure out where everything goes together, it's because it's a little bit more intricate than a cube. A cube of cubes. It's just the way it is. Every person is going to be different in terms of how long they're willing to invest building the bot, but a couple hours to build a bot that you're going to spend hours and hours and hours in matches in doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me. So in this case, this is just kind of a goof around bot. We are going to do some match footage with this bot, and it's going to be of the really aggressive, let's just see how far we can push this thing before we overextend, before we push our luck too much. I think it could be fun, especially given how well it stood up to the tier 10 stuff. And again, the long squiggles. But we're not done yet. I wanted to get some guns in place to just kind of get a feel for the tier 5 guns. One thing I should be very, very clear about, nothing on this bot is higher than tier 5. It's very, very important, because what I see happening right now is that there's complaints about balance like there is in any kind of PvP game. It's par for the course. It is what it is. But when we've got this situation where we start over-tiering, we start doing whatever we can to get the most powerful guns on our bots that we can, and just brute force our way through everything, it creates a nightmare in the balance sort of spectrum, because what we saw with the plasma is that plasma seemed really, really powerful because people were constantly over-tiering with it. As soon as you get to tier 10, where the option to over-tier simply does not exist, plasma is not even mediocre. It feels like really, really not very good right now, and it only took a 10% nerf this last time around. So, I mean, we're not talking about losing a lot of damage, but that image that people have of plasma being this extremely overbearing, obnoxious, overpowered, you know, firing from across the map, etc., which was changed as well. Now there's a limit. Basically, the view range is the limit on how far you can shoot with plasma. But that whole idea of getting hit with a plasma blob at the very beginning of a match and having a big chunk of your bot blown off before you've even had a chance to figure out where the enemy is kind of valid, but it was only happening because over-tiering was happening. And I kind of understand from a creative point of view. You give people all these different tools and all these different blocks, and you say, okay, now go nuts and build with them. You don't want to start imposing arbitrary restrictions on things unless you absolutely have to. But in terms of over-tiering weapons, I kind of feel like we're getting down to that case of, yeah, we have to, because there's too many balance complaints coming from the fact that things were being over-tiered, and then when they were nerfed in response to that, now they're just not very good, and they're not very fun to play. How do you then buff them without putting them back in a position where, when they're used over-tiered, they're going to be too devastating? So it's one of those things, fortunately, I don't have to make the final decisions on that, but it's kind of an issue, and the bottom line is over-tiering doesn't help anyone. It may seem like fun, but it's really kind of destructive in the grand scheme of things. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, you notice all of a sudden, blam, there was all these blocks appeared out of nowhere. That's because I ran out of blocks. It didn't take long to farm up enough to buy more. That was the nice thing. I didn't have to go and farm for 45 minutes for 20 blocks, but I was on a roll and I had this idea of what I wanted to put down, but I didn't have the blocks for it, so I just used the white blocks to fill it in to give you an idea. Now, these are the bridges that I was talking about, that are taking those long, skinny stretches of wiggle and bridging them together, so now that they're not so prone to being knocked off in big chunks. It's going to take a lot of effort for someone trying to shoot through this bot to get through every single layer of this. And it's, again, in terms of a comparison between this and an all-cube build, this is at least as strong as an all-cube build if you had to replace all these prisms with cubes. But in many cases, depending on where the damage is coming from and where it's going, it can be up to 4 times stronger, just because we're routing things around instead of allowing them to, transit directly through to whatever direction it wants to go. So, in terms of the actual cost, this was not bad. You notice I'm using the tier 4 blocks now, and this is not so much because I can't afford any more tier 5, it's because I'm getting very, very close to tiering up into tier 6, and then I've still got to get guns on there. I've still got to get 4 guns, well, 3 now. So we're going to get the rest of the white blocks replaced with orange blocks. We're going to get the rest of the guns on with putting a little bit of extra time in the gun mounts, because of all the times in the past where I've left them kind of flimsy like they are now on this back row that I just put on. That's just to get them started. We're going to come around, we're going to build those out a little bit. You'll get a chance to see that, but the whole idea here is we're getting the guns spotted in place. This is an ideal gun placement. I don't really care. It's not that kind of bot for me. This bot will be able to compete. This bot will be able to contribute. I'm not necessarily at this point worried too much about optimizing performance guns, not shooting the backs of other guns and stuff. It'll do all right, but it's not going to be optimal. But as I was kind of coming to the end of this is when I realized for me it was starting to kind of resemble sort of a slug just like the little sort of wavy bits underneath as it's moving along. It actually looks even more like a slug if you drive it backwards, because it's got the elevated head kind of thing with almost like the slug eye or snail eye machine guns on the side, the SMGs. It's just a fun bot to mess around with. And like I say, we're gonna, instead of just doing regular tier 5 matches in it, we might as well, you know, tier 5, tier 10, might as well do it in tier 10 with the bots that are going to earn the RP. But if we're going to do a lower tier bot, we might as well try and do interesting things with them and not just go into the match and kind of, you know, execute the status quo. So like I say, this one is going to be the push the front and just kind of see how well we stand up against people who are going to be over tiering. We're going to see up to tier 7 weapons, I expect, in these tier 5 matches. And there's going to be a lot of boss battles because the game is technically still in beta and they want people to do those so that they get feedback on them. Of course, by the time the game launches, of course, they won't be forcing us to do boss battles if we don't want to, because that would be silly. But for the time being that it's an early access kind of game, you know, there are certain things that we do and say, yeah, okay, we'll help you test that with the understanding that come launch, it better be gone. Now, this is sort of one of the final stages, finishing this guy off, is filling out this gun mount, getting it ready to go. It's not going to take much. Again, we're just talking about an extra, you know, 2 or 3 blocks in between the gun mount, the block that the gun is on, and the point of entry for damage. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where all the stuff that we've done, all of a sudden we're counting on a certain design element, in this case gun mount, that's so complicated that we push ourselves up into the next tier over it. With all the guns on now, you can see we're right there. We're kind of like a fingernail's width from tier 6. But we're just about done. And that's you know, as robust builds like this go, it's pretty decent time, I think. So I'm going to stop yammering there. We've kind of discussed what the bot is and why it is, and some other things related to this kind of stuff. So the next episode is going to be some sort of match footage, because I don't have any immediate build plans. We have to finish the Thunder Guppy. We're pretty close. At the time that I'm making this video, the Thunder Guppy is about 75 to 80% converted to the necessary armor blocks. We're going to get that into some matches. We've still got Pretty Hate Machine doing match footage and talking about that. And then again, we've got this guy, we can get into some matches and we'll record it and we'll see how much we can annoy the other guys by just being a son of a bitch that they can't kill. Or, you know, we'll be totally embarrassed, one or the other. So if you want to be notified when I add those videos, you can always subscribe to my channel and or follow me on the social media. You get notifications by social media when I add new videos. Links for those in the information section below the video. Please leave your comments and feedback. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and take care.